When I first joined Northbridge Technologies, it felt like stepping into the beating heart of Silicon Valley innovation. The company had grown from a garage startup into a full-fledged tech manufacturing powerhouse valued at nearly $40 million. We were expanding fast, signing lucrative contracts with defense firms, automobile manufacturers, and even a few state agencies. Inside those glass walls, you could almost taste the adrenaline. Everyone wanted to be part of the next big thing. But what I didn't know then was that beneath all that shine, a storm was brewing. I worked as the operations manager, but my role had me sitting in on leadership meetings, mediating internal conflicts, and basically keeping the wheels turning when egos collided. And trust me, there were plenty of egos. The biggest, though, belonged to our newly appointed Chief Operating Officer, Mark Reynolds. Mark came in like he owned the place. He had the resume, Ivy League degree, ex-consultant, polished smile, but also the arrogance that comes with thinking you're the smartest person in the room. Within weeks, he started shaking up departments, cutting budgets, and making enemies. And then there was Ethan. If Northbridge had a backbone, it was him. Ethan was the head of IT, and though his title sounded modest, the reality was he managed everything: our internal servers, encrypted databases, financial software, client portals, security keys, you name it. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of guy who wore the same gray hoodie almost every day and spoke only when he had something worth saying. Most employees barely noticed him. But if our systems crashed, Ethan was the first call, day or night. I'd seen him pull all-nighters to fix code that others couldn't even understand. In a way, he was invisible until something went wrong. Mark didn't like that. He didn't like anyone who didn't bend to his authority. And Ethan, well, Ethan didn't play corporate politics. The first clash happened during a leadership meeting about a major logistics upgrade. Mark demanded that Ethan migrate the company's entire ERP system to a cloud provider over a single weekend. Ethan calmly explained that doing so without a staged rollout would risk critical data loss and downtime. Mark snapped, "I'm not paying you to argue. I'm paying you to make things happen." Ethan just stared back and said, "I'm not arguing. I'm preventing a disaster." From that day forward, Mark had a target on Ethan's back. Over the next few weeks, Mark started micromanaging IT, something he didn't understand at all. He slashed Ethan's team budget, delayed security purchases, and demanded weekly progress presentations. Ethan delivered, of course, but I could see the frustration building. He was being treated like an intern, not the person holding together a digital empire. Then came the Thursday morning meeting that changed everything. The board had gathered in the main conference room, and Mark wanted to show off. He pulled up a dashboard Ethan had created, pointing at numbers he barely understood, and took credit for pushing the IT department toward modernization. Ethan, who was sitting in the back, didn't say a word. But later that afternoon, Mark summoned him to his office and tore into him for not showing more enthusiasm during the presentation. I passed by the office and heard raised voices. Ethan walked out a few minutes later, his face blank, jaw tight. That evening, as people were heading out, Mark cornered Ethan near the elevators. I happened to be a few steps behind. Mark lowered his voice, but not enough. "You think you're untouchable just because you know where all the switches are? Don't push me, Ethan. People like you are replaceable." Ethan didn't respond, but the look in his eyes, I'll never forget it. Calm. Cold. Like a switch had flipped. Over the next few days, Ethan became quieter, but not defeated. He stopped staying late in the office, which was unusual. He started asking unusual questions in leadership meetings, like who had access to financial servers or who approved security protocols. Mark, of course, mocked him, saying things like, "Paranoid much?" But I knew better. I'd seen enough people pushed too far in corporate environments to recognize when someone was shifting gears internally. Then Mark crossed the final line. In a heated Friday afternoon meeting, after Ethan refused to roll out a rushed update that could have exposed customer data, Mark exploded in front of half the department. He accused Ethan of insubordination, threatened to write him up, and said, "One more stunt like this and you're out. I don't care what systems you run. I'll have your replacement here on Monday." The room went silent. Ethan slowly closed his laptop, stood up, and said nothing. He walked out like a man with a plan. Later that night, I received a system-wide memo from Mark announcing leadership restructuring in IT, starting the following week. I knew exactly what that meant. He was going to fire Ethan. What none of us knew was that Ethan wasn't going to go quietly. In fact, he was about to make Northbridge pay for every threat, every humiliation, and every ounce of arrogance it had thrown his way. The Monday morning after Mark's outburst felt different. Ethan arrived at the office right on time, but there was a certain precision to his movements that made me uneasy. He wasn't the usual quiet tech guy dragging his laptop bag and sipping stale coffee. He was focused, intentional, like someone who had made up his mind about something big. In the cafeteria, he skipped his usual table and sat alone, typing furiously on his laptop. A few of the junior IT staff tried to make small talk, but he barely acknowledged them. Later, I saw him moving between server rooms and his office with an unusual sense of urgency. It wasn't frantic, but methodical. He was checking things, taking backups, reviewing access logs. Meanwhile, Mark was in full showman mode. He strutted into the weekly leadership meeting and announced that significant personnel changes were coming to the IT department by Friday. The CFO looked concerned. "Are we sure that's wise before the Q3 reporting cycle?" she asked. Mark brushed her off, saying, "If someone can't keep up with progress, they're dead weight." Ethan was in that meeting too. He didn't speak once. He just sat back, arms crossed, observing Mark like a chess player watching a beginner overextend his queen. When the meeting ended, Ethan lingered by the door for a moment, then quietly left. By Tuesday, whispers had started circulating. Someone from accounting mentioned that Ethan was pulling old network architecture diagrams from the archives. Another person said they saw him removing a stack of labeled hard drives from the storage room. Most people ignored it. IT folks always did weird technical things no one else understood, but I'd worked long enough to recognize contingency planning when I saw it. I caught him by the break room late that afternoon. "Hey," I said gently, "rough week, huh?" He gave a half smile. "You could say that." I hesitated. "You know Mark's playing a dangerous game, right?" He looked at me and replied, "He thinks I'm replaceable. He has no idea what he's messing with." Then he finished his coffee, tossed the cup, and walked away. That was the moment I knew something irreversible was coming. Wednesday morning, Mark called a sudden meeting in the boardroom and invited Ethan. He wanted to discuss the transition timeline. Everyone knew what that meant. It was a pre-termination meeting dressed up as strategy. I wasn't in the room, but people who were told me Mark cornered Ethan, grilled him about system redundancies, demanded passwords to certain financial servers, and even hinted that he might cut Ethan's severance if he didn't cooperate. Apparently, Ethan said very little. He handed over only the bare minimum information required by policy, then calmly excused himself. Mark, furious, sent out a company-wide email afterward complaining about non-compliant employees slowing progress. Thursday was the real turning point. In the late afternoon, after most of the staff had left, Mark stormed into Ethan's office with one of the HR coordinators. I wasn't there, but I later saw the security footage. Mark slammed a file onto Ethan's desk, pointed aggressively, and said something like, "Sign this or pack your things tonight." It was a termination agreement. No warning period. No courtesy. Just pure power play. Ethan didn't flinch. He calmly read the document, closed it, and said, "You might want to reconsider the way you're doing this." Mark laughed and said, "Are you threatening me?" Ethan replied, "No. Just giving you a chance to think." They left without resolution. By Friday morning, rumors were everywhere. Some thought Ethan had already been walked out. Others believed Mark was postponing the firing until after the quarterly audit next week. But what no one knew was that Ethan had spent the last few nights building something quietly, something precise. He'd been writing custom scripts, changing subtle access protocols, and setting up time-delayed network triggers that no one else would notice until it was too late. I spotted him late Friday afternoon near the server racks, holding a small external drive. He looked at me and said, "Busy weekend ahead?" I asked lightly. He gave a small nod and said, "Yeah. One for the history books." Mark spent that afternoon boasting to the CFO about how smooth the transition would be. He even joked that by Monday, they'd have a more obedient IT lead in place. I watched this with an uneasy feeling in my stomach. There was a certain arrogance to Mark that made him blind to danger. He assumed power was in his title, not realizing that in a digital company like ours, power was in the hands of the person who understood the systems. When the office lights dimmed that night and most employees headed out for drinks, Ethan stayed behind. The cleaning staff saw him moving through the hallways quietly, badge scanning into multiple restricted areas. He spent hours inside the server control room. Cameras showed him sitting alone in front of a wall of monitors, typing steadily, occasionally inserting the external drive. That was the night Ethan reached his breaking point. Whatever fear or hesitation he had was gone. He wasn't acting like someone cornered anymore. He was acting like someone with absolute control. And the company, worth $40 million, had no idea that its fate rested in the hands of the very man it was about to discard. The following week started out deceptively normal. Monday morning came with the usual hum of keyboards, coffee machines sputtering in the break room, and employees shuffling into their cubicles, still half asleep. On the surface, everything seemed business as usual. But I noticed Ethan wasn't at his usual spot. His hoodie wasn't draped over his chair, his laptop wasn't sitting on his desk. By mid-morning, word spread that he had called in personal time. That alone raised eyebrows. Ethan never took days off during critical periods, especially with the upcoming quarterly audits. The timing felt deliberate. Mark brushed it off with a smug grin, saying, "Good. Gives us a head start on replacing him." But behind that arrogance, I could tell he was nervous. He'd been pushing hard to gain administrative access to several key systems all week. He'd asked the IT juniors for passwords, tried to override security policies, and even called our cloud provider to reset credentials. But Ethan had structured everything in a way that required multi-step authentication. Mark's titles meant nothing in the face of Ethan's well-designed security protocols. That afternoon, Mark called an emergency leadership meeting. His frustration was palpable. He slammed his palm on the table and shouted, "Why do we not have full access to our own systems? This is unacceptable." The CFO calmly reminded him that Ethan had built layered encryption and that any sudden administrative changes would trigger security alerts. Mark didn't want alerts. He wanted control. "I don't care how," he barked, "make it happen before the audit." The IT juniors shifted uncomfortably. They weren't authorized to bypass their boss's setups, and frankly, they didn't have the skills to undo what Ethan had done. Mark's impatience grew. He threatened to fire one of them on the spot if they didn't cooperate. I intervened, reminding him that intimidating employees could lead to HR violations. He gave me that cold, condescending smile and said, "Noted," before storming out. Meanwhile, Ethan wasn't idle. Later that evening, I checked the remote login logs out of curiosity. Ethan had accessed multiple critical systems from an external secure line. The timestamps showed he'd been working late into the night over the weekend. He wasn't just watching, he was preparing. He'd started rerouting certain backups to encrypted offline storage, altering API keys, and removing unnecessary accounts quietly. He wasn't causing damage yet. He was tightening the net. By Tuesday, I began to understand the scale of what he was doing. One of the IT interns mentioned that Ethan had modified the main administrative script library. "It's like he rewrote the backbone," the intern whispered. "No one can push updates without his signature key now." Mark found out and exploded. He barged into my office and accused HR of harboring a rogue employee. I reminded him that Ethan was still officially employed, and nothing he'd done so far violated company policy. He snarled, "He's setting us up." I can feel it. For once, I agreed with him. On Wednesday, Ethan returned to the office. He walked in calmly, nodded at a few coworkers, and sat down at his desk as if nothing unusual had happened. But the air around him felt different. There was a quiet intensity in his movements, a deliberate rhythm. He wasn't working on support tickets or routine updates. He was running tests, reviewing protocols, and setting up something behind the scenes. Late that afternoon, I spotted him in the server control room again. Through the small window, I saw him sitting in front of the glowing screens, typing with surgical precision. I knocked on the door lightly. He looked up, paused for a moment, then came to the door. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, just finishing some loose ends." His tone was calm, almost too calm. That night, he stayed long after everyone else had left. Security footage later showed him inserting multiple encrypted drives into the mainframe ports, executing scripts that ran in the background, and methodically disabling redundant failsafes. He wasn't being reckless. He was being careful. Each action was deliberate, reversible only by him. He left the building at 2:37 a.m., according to the entry logs. No alarms. No alerts. Just a man laying digital groundwork for something no one else could control. By Thursday, Mark's behavior had shifted from arrogance to desperation. He called multiple emergency meetings, demanded progress reports from IT, yelled at vendors on the phone, and started blaming everyone for incompetence. The board grew uneasy. They had invested millions into infrastructure and could sense that Mark was losing control. That afternoon, I overheard a conversation between Mark and the CEO in the hallway. The CEO asked if everything was stable ahead of the audit. Mark, visibly sweating, lied through his teeth. "Of course. Just routine hiccups." The CEO reminded him that losing operational uptime during the audit week would cost the company millions in delayed contracts. That number stuck with me, millions. Ethan knew exactly how valuable those systems were. And Mark, in his arrogance, had underestimated him completely. That evening, Ethan quietly submitted a request for PTO for the following Monday and Tuesday. It was unusual timing, right before critical reports were due. But no one questioned him. His accrued vacation days were legitimate, and HR policy allowed it. When I saw the request, I had a strange feeling in my gut. Something told me this wasn't just time off. This was strategic. Before leaving the office that night, Ethan walked past my desk. He paused for a moment and said softly, "Take tomorrow off if you can." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. He didn't laugh back. He just nodded, gave a faint smile, and walked out. It sent a chill down my spine. Ethan had set his blueprint. Everything was in motion. And the company, sitting comfortably atop its $40 million valuation, had no idea it was standing on a digital landmine with a timer quietly ticking down. Friday began with an unusual stillness, the kind that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. The sky was gray, the office felt colder than usual, and people seemed a little on edge without knowing why. Mark came in early, pacing the floor like a general before battle. He had 3 different teams lined up for progress checks and was barking instructions before most employees had even logged in. Ethan arrived at exactly 9:02 a.m. He walked past Mark without a glance, his hoodie pulled up, earbuds in, and laptop bag slung over his shoulder. He looked unbothered, almost serene. He went straight to the server room again. This time, he locked the door behind him. Through the glass panel, I saw him place 3 drives on the desk and begin plugging them in one by one. His movements were precise, unhurried, like someone following a well-rehearsed script. Around 11 a.m., I was in HR when Mark stormed in, waving a stack of papers. "Melissa," he growled, "this guy is going to cost us everything. He refuses to give me administrative clearance. He's locking me out of systems that belong to this company." I reminded him that Ethan's security architecture had been approved by the board years earlier and that changing admin protocols required formal board approval. Mark didn't want process. He wanted power. He leaned closer and hissed, "If he doesn't cooperate today, I'll make sure he never works in this industry again." That threat, spoken loud enough for 2 other employees to hear, was the spark that lit everything on fire. Word traveled fast in the office. By lunchtime, half the IT team knew Mark had threatened Ethan's career. And Ethan knew too. When he emerged from the server room around 1 p.m., his expression had changed. The calm was still there, but underneath it was a quiet, dangerous resolve. He didn't speak to anyone. He just walked to his desk, typed furiously for 20 minutes, then packed his laptop and left the building. At 5:46 p.m., Just as most employees were shutting down for the weekend, an email hit everyone's inbox simultaneously. It was a routine notice. Scheduled maintenance window, Friday 11 p.m. to Saturday 4 a.m. Some systems may experience downtime. Everyone brushed it off. Maintenance windows weren't unusual. But Ethan was the only one with the authority to schedule one on short notice, and he hadn't informed Mark. Mark didn't see the email until almost 7:30 p.m., after a tense conference call with investors. When he finally noticed it, he went ballistic. He called Ethan's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He fired off 3 furious emails demanding that the maintenance be canceled. No reply. He tried to log into the server panel, but access was denied. He tried the master admin portal, also denied. His face turned red as he shouted in the empty office, "He's locked me out of my own company." Meanwhile, somewhere outside the building, Ethan was setting everything in motion. Later forensic reports would show that at exactly 10:58 p.m., his encrypted scripts initiated a full cascade shutdown sequence. It started innocuously, rerouting backup servers to offline storage, disabling DNS records, and revoking API keys one by one. Then the real blow hit. The core authentication server was deactivated and moved to a remote encrypted vault. In seconds, no one inside the company could log into internal systems. At 11:07 p.m., the first alerts started. Customer portals went offline. Internal dashboards froze. Production lines relying on digital scheduling ground to a halt. By 11:22 p.m., the company's entire network infrastructure was dark. Emails bounced. File servers went silent. Even the security card system at the main entrance stopped working. Employees who stayed late found themselves locked inside. Mark was still in the building. When the systems went dark, he lost his mind. He screamed at the IT juniors to fix it now, but they couldn't even access their own terminals. The failover systems required Ethan's private key. No one had it. At 11:45 p.m., Mark finally called Ethan. This time Ethan picked up. His voice was calm. "Yes," he said softly. "What the hell did you do?" Mark shouted. "Backups," Ethan replied simply. "Just like always." "You're lying. You shut down the company." "No," Ethan said. "The company shut itself down. Maybe don't threaten people who hold it together." And with that, he hung up. Mark tried calling back again and again, but Ethan never answered. Panic spread through the building. Vendors couldn't connect. Clients were calling nonstop. Production deadlines were missed in real time. By 2 a.m., the company had lost 3 critical overseas contracts due to non-delivery confirmations. By morning, the projected losses climbed past $40 million. The CEO was awakened at 3:12 a.m. by the CTO. Within an hour, a full crisis team was assembled remotely. They tried to bring Ethan in, but his number was off. He had already disappeared, leaving behind perfectly encrypted systems no one else could unlock without his cooperation. By sunrise, the once buzzing headquarters looked like a ghost ship. Screens flickered with login errors, alarms beeped softly in the distance, and Mark sat in the boardroom staring at his dead laptop like someone watching their house burn down. Every attempt to bypass Ethan's security measures triggered more locks. His scripts were airtight. This wasn't sabotage, it was precision digital revenge. The following Monday will forever be known inside that company as Black Monday. Even months later, people would lower their voices when they talked about it, as if saying the words too loudly might bring the disaster back. When I arrived at the office at 8 a.m., there was a line of employees outside the building, all locked out by the still-disabled security badge system. The IT support team had set up folding tables outside, frantically trying to create temporary login credentials on old laptops they'd dug out of storage. People were confused, frustrated, and scared. Some whispered that we'd been hacked by a foreign group. Others said Ethan had sold the company secrets. No one knew the full story yet, except a few of us. Mark was already inside, pacing the lobby like a man awaiting execution. His face was gray from lack of sleep, his shirt wrinkled, tie missing. He had dark circles under his eyes. He'd spent the entire weekend in crisis calls with the board, investors, vendors, and lawyers. Every conversation ended with the same question: why don't you have control of your own systems? And every time, Mark had no good answer. The board convened an emergency meeting at 9:30 a.m. The CEO flew back overnight from a conference in Denver. He walked into the boardroom like a storm. I'd never seen him angry before, not like this. He didn't yell, but his voice had a deadly calm when he said, "Explain to me why one employee could take down an entire $40 million company overnight." Mark tried to spin it. He said Ethan had gone rogue, that he was a disgruntled IT guy with a god complex. He omitted the part where he'd threatened Ethan on Friday, of course. But unfortunately for Mark, multiple employees had overheard that confrontation, including me. And when the board started asking questions, the truth surfaced quickly. The head of legal played a recorded voicemail Ethan had left on the company's general counsel line, an insurance measure he must have set up earlier. In the message, Ethan calmly explained that he was initiating standard security protocols and that any disruption would be the result of unauthorized interference with systems. He also attached a timeline of Mark's unauthorized access attempts, showing how Mark had tried to override firewalls and failed. It painted a damning picture. Ethan hadn't hacked anything. He'd simply secured the infrastructure exactly as designed. Then came the kicker. Ethan had sent an encrypted package to the board itself with full access keys, time-locked to unlock 48 hours later. It was his way of proving that he hadn't destroyed anything, just locked it up safely. He controlled the clock. The company could either work with him professionally or wait 2 full days to regain access. It was brilliant, infuriating, and completely legal. He hadn't broken a single law. Every action he took was within his job description. By noon, the company had missed dozens of operational deadlines. The lost contracts had ballooned to roughly $40.3 million in damages. Investors were panicking. 2 major clients announced they were suspending future deals pending an internal audit. The media started sniffing around. By 3 p.m., 3 tech news blogs ran with the headline, $40M company paralyzed overnight by IT architect after executive threat. Mark's name wasn't in the articles yet, but internally, everyone knew who had lit the match. That afternoon, the board called Ethan in for a formal negotiation. He showed up. Hoodie, calm face, same as always. He walked into the boardroom like he owned the place. Mark tried to speak, but the CEO shut him down with a single look. Not a word, he said coldly. Ethan laid out his terms plainly. He wanted a clean resignation package, full severance, and a non-disparagement agreement. He also wanted immunity from any legal retaliation, which he'd already had 3 lawyers review over the weekend. In exchange, he'd restore all systems, hand over the full administrative keys, and assist the transition team for 2 weeks to prevent another crisis. The board didn't have much choice. They could sue him, maybe, but it would take months, cost millions, and the company would bleed out in the meantime. So they agreed. Within hours, Ethan unlocked the core servers. By Tuesday morning, operations were slowly limping back online. But the damage was done. Those $40 million in losses weren't coming back. And Mark? He didn't survive the fallout. When the board reviewed the internal communications, the recorded threats, and his reckless weekend behavior, they voted unanimously to terminate him for gross misconduct. The CEO didn't even let him clean out his desk alone. Security escorted him out while employees watched in stunned silence. This was the same man who, just days earlier, had strutted through the office like he was untouchable. Now he walked out with a cardboard box and his head down. Ethan left on his own terms. The company paid him well to make the problem go away quietly. But word about what happened spread through the tech industry like wildfire. Some people called him a hero. Others called him dangerous. But no one underestimated him again. For weeks afterward, the company held crisis recovery meetings, trying to rebuild systems, re-earn client trust, and assure investors that something like this would never happen again. New policies were introduced. Multiple admin keys were required. No single employee could ever hold absolute access again. Ironically, those were the same policies Ethan had suggested years earlier, policies Mark had vetoed to save costs. As for me, I learned something that week. power doesn't always look like a corner office or a big title. Sometimes, it looks like the quiet guy in the hoodie who knows where all the wires are buried. The company would eventually recover, but it would never forget the weekend Ethan reminded everyone who actually kept the lights on.